Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're untangling the incredibly fast-moving and honestly highly contradictory events surrounding the June 2026 US-Iran peace deal. It's a monumental diplomatic effort that seemingly fractured in literally just 72 hours. We're going to look closely at the timeline, the official statements, and the massive ripple effects all of this is having on global energy and international markets. Let's get right into it. So, how does a historic 14-point peace deal, one that was meant to reopen 20% of the world's oil supply, fracture in a mere 3 days? Well, to answer that, we have to look at the wild sequence of events that took us from a landmark memorandum of understanding straight back to renewed threats of naval closures. For months, the world watched as conflict disrupted one of the most vital waterways on Earth. Then, out of nowhere, a deal was struck. But, as we're about to see, declaring peace and actually enforcing it, those turned out to be two very different things. Here's our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll cover the fragile 72-hour peace, the conflicting official statements, the shipping insurance trap, the impact on global markets, and finally, the future energy shift. Starting with Section 1, the fragile 72-hour peace and the June 17 Memorandum of Understanding. To establish our baseline here, on June 17th, a Memorandum of Understanding was signed between U.S. President Donald Trump and Iranian President Masoud Pezeshkian. It was brokered with the help of nations like Oman, Qatar, and Pakistan. Now, this 14-point agreement promised three main things: a 60-day toll-free window for commercial traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, an end to Israeli military operations in Lebanon, and a framework for nuclear negotiations. This framework included the phased release of up to $25 billion in frozen Iranian assets, assuming they complied, of course. Basically, it was designed as a temporary, 60-day cooling-off period to allow for much deeper technical negotiations over in Switzerland. But man, that peace lasted mere days. The deal was signed on June 17th, and the strait reopened to a small trickle of 25 ships on the 18th. But by June 19th, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, was already broadcasting warnings on international marine channels. Then, on June 20th, they formally declared the strait closed again, citing continued Israeli strikes in Lebanon. And yet, despite all of that, on June 21st, U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance landed in Switzerland to formally launch the nuclear talks. It's like the foundational agreement was just fracturing in real time. Moving to Section 2, conflicting official statements. It's a true war of words over the waterway. In a typical conflict, the status of a battlefield is usually pretty clear. But here, official statements completely contradicted each other on what was actually happening on the water. The IRGC formally declared the waterway closed, stating it was a direct response to what they called an enemy breach of promise in Lebanon, and they even fired warning shots. Conversely, U.S. Central Command issued a flat denial within hours. They stated, quite bluntly, that Iran does not control the strait and that U.S. forces were actively ensuring traffic continued to flow. And the reality on the water actually seems to back up CENTCOM's account. In fact, they confirmed that despite the IRGC's broadcast warnings and those warning shots, 55 merchant ships carrying over 17 million barrels of oil successfully transited the strait on that very same Saturday the closure was announced. To put that into perspective, that is roughly 17% of the entire world's daily oil consumption moving through the water in a single day, right under the threat of fire. Because the U.S. maintains such a massive naval presence in the region, Iran's physical capacity to enforce a total naval blockade is, pretty severely limited. Adding another layer to this geopolitical puzzle, President Trump issued a pretty provocative statement on social media. He suggested that if a final deal isn't reached, the U.S. might unilaterally impose tolls on the strait for services rendered as a guardian to the Middle East. Now, this is absolutely huge because unilaterally charging tolls on an international waterway challenges long-standing maritime norms, the exact same norms that the U.S. has historically protected. To really grasp the confusion here, we also have to look at the internal dynamic inside Iran, specifically their dual authority structure. On the exact same day the IRGC military wing declared the strait closed, Iran's civilian foreign ministry basically denied reports of any tensions and said shipping was completely unaffected. This dual structure means we're constantly seeing conflicting claims about what Iran's actual policy is, which, as you can imagine, makes international negotiations incredibly volatile. That brings us to Section 3, the shipping insurance trap, and the role of the Persian Gulf Strait Authority. So it turns out Iran's physical closure might actually just be a rhetorical smokescreen for a far more effective legal mechanism. Let's break this complex trap down step by step. Step 1, the peace deal guaranteed 60 days of toll-free transit. But Step 2, Iran quietly mandates that all ships must obtain transit permits and insurance through their newly created Persian Gulf Strait Authority, or PGSA. Right now, during the 60-day window, that insurance is free. But in mid-August, when the window closes, Step 4 kicks in. The PGSA plans to charge fees. The massive catch here in Step 3, the U.S. Treasury's Office of Foreign Assets Control has already sanctioned the PGSA as a terrorist-linked entity, which leads to Step 5. Western ships paying PGSA fees would violate U.S. sanctions. So, how can Western commercial shipping possibly survive when the only mandatory insurance provider is a sanctioned entity? This is the massive dilemma facing global shipping companies right now. In a few weeks, if they pay the PGSA insurance fee, they violate U.S. sanctions and face severe legal penalties. But if they refuse to pay, Iran will legally bar them from entering the strait, treating them as hostile vessels. It is a highly effective, entirely bureaucratic blockade that doesn't require firing a single shot. Let's look at Section 4, Impact on Global Markets, from trapped ships to retail fuel. Even with this tentative peace deal, the global market absolutely has not recovered. First off, over 500 ships and 20,000 crew members have been trapped in the Gulf for months. On top of that, approximately 80 unmapped sea mines remain in the water, which means marine insurance premiums are still through the roof. And if you're wondering why retail fuel prices in nations like India aren't dropping immediately for everyday consumers, well, it's because domestic oil companies absorbed massive losses during the peak of the crisis without raising prices on consumers. So now that crude prices are stabilizing, governments are allowing those companies to recover their losses before they drop retail prices. Furthermore, disrupted fertilizer shipments are causing a massive, dangerous ripple effect on global agriculture and food security. Finally, Section 5, the future energy shift, bypassing the choke points. The shockwaves of this 72-hour crisis are permanently altering the long-term global energy landscape because nations and corporations have suddenly realized the sheer strategic vulnerability of relying on a single 33-kilometer geographic choke point. They are aggressively adapting. We are seeing an immediate, massive acceleration of capital pouring into renewable energy and European grid projects. There's an urgent corporate shift toward in-house electrification just to bypass the wild volatility of global oil. Even Gulf exporting nations themselves are investing heavily in new pipelines and alternative export terminals to get their product to market without having to sail it through Hormuz. The strategy across the board is crystal clear: bypass the choke point altogether. As the negotiators sit in Switzerland, navigating conflicting public statements, unresolved military grievances, and the ticking clock of a massive sanctions trap, the stakes literally couldn't be higher. So, we'll leave you with this final thought to consider about the very future of our global order. Are we watching the messy, contradictory birth of a permanent Middle Eastern peace? Or are we simply witnessing the calm before an unprecedented global energy shock? Thank you so much for joining us for this explainer, and keep asking the right questions.